The year is 1815. After 6 years of exile on the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy, Napoleon Bonaparte has returned to France and taken the throne once more. Europe is divided into two massive coalitions, intent on crushing the self-proclaimed emperor. But before the Allies can lay a glove on him, he's gone, vanished like a puff of smoke. Or rather, he's in Belgium. And if he stays there long enough, he may yet turn the tables on his would-be jailers. This is the Battle of Waterloo, the final battle of Napoleon's life. As we open our story, Napoleon has been on the run for 3 weeks, desperately trying to rally his forces and find a way out of Belgium. He has already lost the battles at Cotter, Brass, and Ligny to the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard, Lebarcht von Blücher, respectively. In fact, that last one was one of the closest calls of Napoleon's career, almost ending in his capture by the Prussians. As it stands, he barely escaped with his life, losing most of his baggage train and nearly all of his artillery in the process. To top it all off, it started raining. Not just a light spring rain either, but a torrential downpour that makes movement across the muddy countryside a nightmare. For Napoleon, it couldn't have been worse timing. His army is tired, hungry, and demoralized after a month of campaigning. They need rest, they need food, and they need artillery. But the only place nearby where they can get any of those things in quantity is the village of Waterloo, which happens to be squarely in the path of advancing Prussian and British forces. So Napoleon does what any reasonable general would do. He sends out a cavalry screen to hold off the Allies, while his infantry takes some much-needed R&R. That cavalry screen is led by one of the most audacious generals in the French army, Édouard Adolphe Casimir Comte de Murat. He knows he won't be able to stop the British and Prussians forever, but he hopes to slow them down enough for Napoleon to escape through a gap in the Allied lines and live to fight another day. Except the plan doesn't work. The French cavalry gets crushed like a grape by a numerically superior British force and retreat in disarray. Seeing this, Napoleon realizes he's got to make a decision fast. Should he press on towards Paris and try to rally his remaining troops there, or should he try to escape across the North Sea and start a new life in exile? He decides on the former, believing he can still put up a good fight even with an army stripped of its guns and supplies. So he turns around and rides back towards Brussels, figuring he'll meet up with the remnants of his force there. Unfortunately, he finds that his staff officers have gotten lost in the mud and are unable to guide him to the rendezvous point. Undeterred, he presses on until he finds some cavalrymen who tell him that the rest of his army is just 2 miles away near the village of Mont Street. Amen. Finally, things are looking up. He spends the night here resting with the cavalry, knowing that tomorrow he will lead his troops to victory and finally be able to go home. Except he's not Napoleon. If he were, he wouldn't spend the night in a place called Mont Street, Amen. He'd spend it in a place called Mont Street. Jean? And sure. The spelling is different because he's in the Netherlands, but still. He's made a terrible mistake and has walked right into a trap laid by Wellington and Blücher. By the time he realizes what's happened, it's too late. The Allied armies have descended upon him from every direction. Fighting is fierce and desperate. Napoleon throws everything he has into the fray, but the Allies are too strong. His men fire their muskets at the oncoming soldiers, then throw down their weapons and draw their swords to finish off the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Cannons roar as artillerymen on both sides try to outduel each other, and all the while, the rain keeps falling, soaking the combatants and turning the battlefield into a sea of mud. It's a gruesome, chaotic mess. In the end, the Allies win, and Napoleon is forced to flee once more, this time without his horse, which had been shot out from under him. He runs as fast as he can, stumbling through the mud and slipping on dead bodies until he reaches a farmhouse where he hides out for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, the Allies regroup and prepare for one last push to finish off the French once and for all. Wellington wants to lead the attack himself, but Blücher insists that he's needed in Prussia and refuses to wait another day. So they part ways, agreeing to meet up again in Paris and divide the spoils. Now, as the Prussians march away, Napoleon emerges from his farmhouse and begins making his way toward Paris. It's over. Even though his army is still intact, he knows that the game is up. There's simply too many enemies and not enough friends. So he changes into civilian clothes and slips out of town, hoping to get away unnoticed. Only problem is, nobody's really looking for him. The Allies aren't interested in taking prisoners. They want to plunder Paris and claim as much of the city's treasure for themselves as possible. So Napoleon walks freely through the streets, hiding in plain sight and catching a carriage out of town. Eventually, he makes it to Rochefort and boards a ship bound for the United States. On board, he lives like a pauper, hiding in the hold and eating the cheapest food available. But he's a free man, and that's all that matters. Once he reaches America, he settles down in Philadelphia and begins planning his return to power, but it never happens. He spends the rest of his life in exile, eventually dying of stomach cancer in 1821. Though Napoleon is defeated, the war is not over yet. The conflict will drag on for another 2 years with several smaller battles being fought across Europe. In the end, neither side will win a decisive victory, but the peace that follows will be very costly for France. They're reforced to pay 700 million francs to the Allies as reparations for the damage done during the war. This will lead to widespread poverty and instability, setting the stage for the revolutions of 1830 and 1848. As for Wellington and Blucher, they become national heroes in Britain and Prussia, respectively. The Duke of Wellington will go on to serve as Prime Minister of Britain and Field Marshal in the army, while Blucher will be given the title of National War Hero in Prussia and a massive victory parade in Berlin. Not bad for two guys who almost died of exhaustion at Waterloo. Waterloo was a strange battle. It was one of the few times in history when an outnumbered and exhausted army was able to defeat a larger, better-equipped force. It was also one of the last major battles of the Napoleonic Wars, which saw Napoleon conquer much of Europe and establish a dynasty that lasted for over a century. Finally, it was the last battle in which Napoleon personally participated. He would go on to abdicate the throne and die in exile, but never again take up arms to defend his homeland. The Battle of Waterloo is often remembered as a great victory for the Allies, but it was anything but. They suffered heavy casualties and made little progress against Napoleon's forces. In fact, if not for the timely arrival of the Prussians, Wellington might have been forced to retreat with his tail between his legs. As it was, both sides claimed victory, and neither was truly victorious. All that said, Waterloo is still considered one of the most important battles in European history. It marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the beginning of a new era of peace and stability on the continent. It also led directly to the rise of Great Britain as a global superpower and the decline of France as a major player on the world stage. Today, the site of the battle is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there is a large memorial dedicated to those who died there. Every June, on the anniversary of the battle, people from all over the world come together at Waterloo to remember those who fought and died there. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. We've got lots more stories about famous battles coming up, including the Battle of Hastings and the Battle of Thermopylae. So stay tuned.